There's a pattern that shows up with a lot of brands once they've started creating content consistently. They'll post and that post, they finally find something that works. It's getting engagement, it's sparking conversation, people are responding. And then the next day they completely shift into a whole new direction, a whole different line of thinking. Maybe it's a different topic, maybe it's a different angle, or even a different message. Nothing necessarily builds on what happened that just was starting to gain traction and getting momentum. And if you find yourself constantly starting over with your posts, then what we're going to be talking about today will hopefully really resonate. And we're going to be talking about why that individual post mentality is usually going to struggle in creating lasting results, and how you can kind of shift your mindset to more campaign thinking, so to speak, and how that's going to build and help you create momentum instead of just resetting every single time. This is Marketing on Point, and this episode is all about momentum. Welcome to Marketing on Point, the podcast where strategy meets clarity. Every episode, we break down real-world strategies, stories, and impactful tactics to help you grow your brand. Let's dive in. When you think about buying habits, or even trying to persuade someone, or even just building a relationship with someone, people don't usually make decisions or make deep and meaningful connections the first time they see something. They might notice it, yes, but then it usually takes 2, 3, 4, 5, even more times for them to really just start to even notice again and again and again. And then once they've noticed it multiple times, that's when they start to kind of pay attention. But even then, that's just building familiarity. It's not until after that familiarity is built that action starts to follow. And, marketing works the exact same way. And when you kind of think about marketing, and you got to think about how context and how context matters, how repetition matters, how reinforcement matters. And what I find so often is that most people are just thinking of, today is Tuesday, what am I going to post today? Today is Thursday, what am I going to post today? We've talked about this on the podcast before, and we'll talk about it again. One-off posts, they rarely provide that true, meaningful dig in the sand and get in the mud and get that traction going. It more so just gets you stuck, because what happens is you'll have one type of post or one thing that will kind of take off, and it will exist for a moment. It'll get a response, but then it disappears, and you typically never tend to come back around to it. And that is, that's a lot of times why so many brands feel like their content performs just kind of in flashes or in spikes. Yes, part of that is the algorithm. Yes, part of that is you just kind of happen to get a mini or even extremely viral moment, even if it's just viral for you and your platform. But that single post will kind of get that traction, but it then just ends and moves on. And a lot of times as creator or marketers, as we're planning things, we also move on. Whereas when you start to think more campaign style, when you start to look at this worked in the past, you start to really dissect analytics and really look at the types of posts that your audience is responding to, then you could start to create campaigns around that. And a campaign mentality really helps keep working even after that first post or kind of that first impression. Campaign thinking, it really removes the pressure to make every post carry the full weight of your full message. It instead asks one piece of content to either educate or to inspire or to explain or to convert, rather than also often we find ourselves as marketers and business owners and entrepreneurs really trying to compact and compound all of that into one post. Instead, campaigns really allow the idea to kind of unfold over time, and it invites people into more of a larger conversation. A campaign, it really is one idea that's reinforced across multiple moments from many different angles. And when you start to think this way, the question should shift. You should stop asking, what am I posting today? And really start asking what you want your audience to understand, believe, or remember over the next few weeks. I think that this is how brands create familiarity without feeling repetitive. I have clients all the time who say, I feel like we posted that, or we posted about that already. And all too often they kind of get into the idea of, well, we said that once, let's move on to something else. But that repetition, as long as you are doing repetition in kind of a fresh and engaging perspective, is really what's going to build momentum. I think once you start to really think about this from a larger level, and when you really start to wrap your mind around it, you kind of see this campaign idea everywhere once you truly start paying attention to it. For instance, Nike doesn't introduce a concept just one time and then abandon it, or Apple doesn't just launch a product and then immediately move on. Usually they're going to stay on that key message, that key campaign for months or even a year or more sometimes. The message always is going to stay consistent. Now the execution evolves, the way that you are executing on and the way that you're approaching that message evolves and changes perspective, but the actual message itself is what is going to stay and resonate. Research from Nielsen supports this and really kind of says that repeated exposure, the current stat is that it takes 7 to 9 times for someone to see something or to have different touch points with something before they can even have brand recall. So that means that you have to have consistent messaging, and that consistent messaging improves brand recall and brand trust, both. People don't respond because something is new. They respond because it feels familiar. So what you're trying to do when you first introduce something is to introduce it as new and as exciting. But then you're trying to make it feel new and exciting, but familiar and relevant. And that is when that moment, when you get to that point where something feels new and exciting, but familiar and relevant, that is when action arrives. Let's do something practical and take something practical from this. So think about the last piece of content you shared that performed really well. Maybe it got a bunch of saves, or maybe it sparked a lot of comments. Maybe it got way more shares than a lot of your other things that you got. Now look and see if you did anything to kind of wrap around that moment or wrap around that idea, or if that was the end of that and you kind of moved on to a different message or a different post or whatever that might be. If it was just a one-time moment, that's just kind of one-off posting. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but like I said earlier, it's not going to build that traction you want. Maybe look at that and see, how can we build a campaign around this? That campaign, it takes the signal that your audience liked and engaged with that one piece of content, and it builds off of that. It starts to create momentum. So you might start by introducing the idea of, all right, this thing got a lot of shares or a lot of comments. How can I go back and revisit the idea of what people were resonating with? Then come up with a post that's going to show that in action. Then come up with a third post that explains why that product or that message or whatever you are that people are resonating with, why does that matter? And more importantly, why does it matter to the person on the other side of the screen, the person who is scrolling and liking and consuming that piece of content? Maybe the next post should address a common hesitation about what it is that you're really crafting. Then do another follow-up post. Invite your users, invite the people seeing that post one step closer to taking an actual action, to actually engaging and participating with the conversation around whatever it is that you are trying to highlight and promote. Then, after all of that, you start to notice once you have those 6 or 7 posts that I just mentioned, that the message should be staying the same, but the way that you're saying that message, the expression of that is what changes. And that's when you're going to start to see momentum. That's when you're going to start to see brand recall and building that brand trust. I think that a lot of times the ideas, the good post ideas are already there and you already have enough of those, but it's just that most of the time our tendency as we get into the grind of things is just to churn out content and just to get the next post up, just to move on to the next thing. And we move past good ideas too quickly. Whereas campaigns look at what is our audience resonating with? What is it that they are most wanting to tap into and most wanting from us? And how can we slow down the conversation and let the idea do the heavy lifting for us? I also think it makes content creation easier, because instead of having to start from scratch every single day, you're building from a foundation. You have this foundation of an idea of this is what I'm going to build upon. So then you can plan around it. And then you can execute on it. And that planning becomes clear. That execution feels more focused. And I genuinely believe that you're going to start to see more momentum and more traction from this approach. And I don't think that this approach necessarily is reserved for just big launches. I think you can build a campaign around so many things, whether that's a single service or a specific customer problem, a belief maybe that your brand stands for, or even a reoccurring question that your audience keeps asking over and over and over again. When you start to look at those, again, it's just about going and looking back at the analytics of what are people resonating with? What do people want from me? And what is the message that I need them to hear? And then you can build around all of that. I also don't think that you necessarily need a large budget or even a complex rollout to execute kind of this campaign mentality. I think it really comes down to just needing one clear idea and then the discipline enough to stay on it, to make it matter and to see if it's really going to get the traction that you want, or if you need to move on to another idea and another campaign. A simple framework for you that I think you can use right away. Choose one idea that you want your audience to understand more deeply. Then take a few minutes to plan just 5 pieces of content around it. The first piece is introduce the idea. What is it that you want your audience to understand more deeply about your brand, about a product, about a belief, about whatever it is? Introduce that idea. What is that idea? Then the second post is explain why this idea matters. Why should anyone care? Why is it going to benefit the person on the other side of the screen? Then show it in action. Really kind of slow it down and let people see, oh, this is what my life is like before taking action, and this is what it's like to actually use it and get your hands on it, and then this is what life is going to be like after. And then the fourth piece that I want you to think about is, what are common objections? Is it price? Is it investment of time? Is it just that they don't think that it's actually worthwhile, or that it needs more explaining? What are the common objections? And create a piece of content addressing those common objections. Then the final piece of content that I want you to create is inviting the users to take a next step, whether that is to explore it more, to take a demo, to get on a call, to actually make a purchase, whatever that next step is, even if it's not all the way to the end of the client journey. Maybe it's just a small step forward, or maybe it is all the way to the end of the client journey. Just invite the next step. So take those 5 posts, create them, and you have a campaign. And you can run that campaign over a week, over a month. It can live on one platform, on several. The goal is just really to have brand cohesion and an a cohesive idea that people can latch onto and that they can follow along with. I think that most brands really worry about being repetitive when in reality, the audience is only seeing pieces over time. And so you need that consistency to create clarity, and that clarity is going to build trust, and that trust is going to create momentum. And campaign thinking is how you stop starting over, because individual posts, those don't turn into momentum. Individual posts, when they are laced together into a campaign, that's when things start to turn into momentum. That's when things start to get that traction that you're looking for. So if this has resonated with you, and if you have felt like in the past that your marketing's felt scattered or exhausting, then maybe think more on campaign style posting or campaign style content creation rather than just one-off content. It's going to eliminate fewer ideas. It's going to create more focus. And I think it's going to help you as well as a business owner or a marketer or an entrepreneur or a musician, a creative. It's going to give you better follow through as well, because it's easier for you to understand. And in doing that, it's also going to be easier for your audience to understand. Well, that's all I have for you today. I want to thank you so much for listening to Marketing on Point, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening to Marketing on Point. This podcast is all about helping you show up with clarity, connect with the right audience, and build a brand that actually grows. It's brought to you by Wander Creative, your full service partner for strategy, content, and execution that moves people. If this episode helped you think differently, do us a favor, subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a quick review. It helps more people discover the show and build brands that actually make an impact. We'll see you next time.